Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another short for our podcast series, Real Talk with Shan and Bilal. This one is going to be a short from me, Shan, because a few days ago, Bilal uploaded an episode of him covering a certain topic that we're not going to get to in the first season. So today I'm going to go in a completely different direction on what we usually cover. I'm going to talk about the Indian visa backlog issue, and this particular topic was recommended to me by one of my uncles who lives all the way in California. I'd like to thank him. I want to keep his name anonymous because he has not given me permission to publicize his name. So I will thank him for giving me the idea of this topic. Now, before we get into this, I'd just like to say one thing. This does hit home for me because when my dad came here, I think it was in the late 1990s. When he did come here, he was a green card holder. In fact, he gained citizenship along with my mom and I on the same day in 2012. So we've been green card holders in this country for a fairly long period of time, for 12 years of my life, which is a huge part of my life, about 3/4 of my life, in fact. So this issue does hit home, but I try to keep a more objective stance, a more centrist stance on it, because I myself am more conservative than I am liberal. So you will definitely hear both sides of the issue from me personally and from a factual point of view from some of the sources that I will list in this episode, and they're also going to be listed in the description section under this video as well. So let's get into this topic. Well, the first thing that I want to say is that 100,000 yearly green card applications are received by the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, which is strange. From another source, I think it said that about 1 million were issued by the USCIS, which is a short for the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services department that I'm gonna call USCIS from now on, just for the sake of convenience. Only about 10% on average are cleared, and 140,000 of them, which is about 14% of all of the ones that are issued by the USCIS yearly, are employment-based, and Indians make up about 7% of that. 7% of that 140,000. So a very minuscule percentage of all the green cards that are issued by the USCIS each year, but regardless, it's still a very pertinent issue in the Indian community from a personal point of view. An average Indian resident, especially ones that are in their late 40s and upwards, they have to wait in upwards of 70 years to receive citizenship in this country. And most green card holders don't attain citizenship at all. My dad was one of the lucky ones who gained citizenship about 20 odd years after being in this country. I think the exact number was 14 years being into this country. Before that, he was a green card holder. Now, in case you're wondering, how is that possible? If you're 40 years old, how do you wait another 70 years on average to receive citizenship in this country? Well, that's the point. A lot of people, they stay in this country on green card membership. They overreach their stay. A lot of them get deported each year because of the fact that it's nearly impossible to be issued citizenship in this country, especially if you're an Indian citizen. Children of Indian-born citizens without citizenship, they also miss out on college benefits. There is a student who is an H4 dreamer. We'll get into that term later. Her name is Preeti. Her parent is one of the 100 Indian techies and professionals that urged Congress to act on this Indian H-1B visa holders campaign issue in front of the Capitol building. I believe it was on October 18th. I might need to correct that if I am wrong, but on October 18th, 100 Indian techies and professionals called for Congress to address this issue and to issue out as many citizenship visas as possible for tax-paying legal Indian citizens in the United States. So this woman, Preeti, she is in college, and she cannot rely legally on her parents' visa after secondary school, which is high school. And because of this, because she's in college and she's basically on her own, she's called an H4 dreamer, which is another term for a person who was reliant on their parents' green card membership status, but cannot reap the benefits of that themselves. So what she has to do is she has to transfer to an F1 visa, which basically entails that she is an international student. Now, here's some advantages and disadvantages of the F1 visa. I'm going to link this article in the description section as well. Two of the advantages, the most important ones that pertain to Preeti's case, are that she is able to attain a U.S. education at all, which is not a privilege that a lot of that a lot of residents in this country get. Colleges usually accept F1s because they entail that the student carrying the F1 visa is an international student. Now, the second advantage is that there's more flexibility of travel in and out of the U.S. during their stay, and F2 visas, visa carriers, who are basically the dependents and usually family members of the person who is holding the F1 visa, are able to aid them in their travel in and out of the United States as well. So they're much more flexible in their travel, visiting maybe their native country, in this case India. She is able to do that much more flexibly than, say, a green card visa holder who has to go through a lot more regulations, even a citizen as well. And now here are the disadvantages. Here's what really puts her at a disadvantage from any normal student who is attending college as a so-called international student, even though she's lived in this country her whole life, almost 15 years, I think it says in the article that mentions her name. So you need USCIS permission to work off campus, regular permission, otherwise you will be adjudicated, not adjudicated, you will be taken off of campus, you will be revoked of your visa, your visa membership. Sorry, I'm having a slip of tongue at the moment, but you will be revoked of that if you violate that, or if you do not seek USCIS permission to work off campus beforehand, if you do so. So the second disadvantage is that you must leave within a short period of time after finishing studies. Now, this is very simple. This is very similar to an H-1B visa as well, that a lot of Indian workers coming from different parts of India, coming to the U.S. for about 1.5, 2 years. I don't exactly know when H-1B visas expire because I think they're subjective based on the company that issues them. So they have to leave as soon as the company requires them to leave, and as soon as their visa membership basically expires. So this is something that the F1 and the H-1B visa have in common. And if she stays here and if she gets caught by ICE, which is the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement Department, a very maligned department in the U.S. government as of late because of their crackdown on illegal immigration from the southern border as of late in this country. If they find her, then they can possibly deport her. They are within their legal limits to their legal capabilities to deport her from this country. So there's a very stringent period of time that she has to finish her studies by, according to this F1 visa. Usually they're longer than H1Bs because finishing studies takes a longer time than it does to maybe complete a project in the United States for, say, an engineering firm. And the final disadvantage I have listed here, and possibly the most consequential for someone like Preeti, who's a college student, is that F2 dependents are not eligible for employment at all. So not only can they not study in the United States in her case, but they're not eligible for employment. So if they're barely making ends meet, Preeti's the only one. If all the F2 dependents are her only dependents and she doesn't have anyone that has a green card in her family, or maybe in this case her father isn't in this country and maybe visits India, then none of her dependents are eligible for employment, and she must feed all those stomachs. She is responsible for basically feeding her family all by herself. But they're eligible to travel, as we mentioned in one of the advantages of the F1 visa. So she has to work for herself. She must leave within a stringent period of time after finishing her studies, and she needs USCIS permission to work off campus. And if she works on campus, not necessarily, but basically the USCIS is tracking her each and every movement and each and every basically activity within this country. So now that we've got that out of the way, let's move on to why these problems are now being addressed newly and even being exacerbated, especially in the past 1 year. So under the Trump administration, it has basically become more stringent for you to appeal for an H-1B visa, for an F1 visa as an international student, and for green card citizenship as well, because, first of all, the key influence for Trump before he was fired a few months ago, I believe it was Steve Bannon. We talked about him in one of our prior podcasts, I believe it was episode 3, we basically talked about his influence in the White House. And he was a person who was very against the H-1B visa. He wants more American citizens, American-born citizens, to have Silicon Valley jobs and jobs that are currently being occupied by H-1B and green card visa holders, especially the latter of which, the green card holders especially. He is against issuing new ones for the time being and trying to get more of a labor force participation rate out of the actual American citizens. So the H-1B cutback, which was proposed under the Trump administration, I think within the first month of him assuming the highest office of the land, that caused a lot of Indian citizens to be it caused them to move back to the country. It made them lose their work status, lose their employment. A lot of them got deported, which means they involuntarily had to go back to their place of birth. For the most part, in this case, I'm mostly talking about India rather than Central America and Mexico. Now, usually I would be against this, coming from the background that I come from, but I actually kind of agree with Steve Bannon because, in a sense, it does overheat our economy. But I am against him in the sense that we should all lump the H-1B holders or even green card holders in one bubble, where we put the people who are committing atrocious crimes, basically illegal immigrants who are committing crimes with the people who are in this country legally for over a decade. I mean, an average Indian-born green card holder has lived in the U.S., has lived here for an average of 5 years, some over a decade. An average of 5 years, that is a long time to live in this country, and they have paid taxes every year. There's a very, very small percentage of Indian-born green card holders that have lived in this country that have not paid American taxes, either federal income or state income or whatever it may be. It's very, very rare that Indian-born green card holders have not paid these taxes. The crime rate amongst I wouldn't say illegals, but green card holders and H-1B holders, very, very few. Illegals here that are Indian-born, very, very few compared to illegals coming from other countries, including Europe as well, who have basically overreached their stay here in this country, and that's what constitutes them as an illegal immigrant. So to address this issue, the group called Skilled Immigrants in America, they have a Twitter page, they have a Facebook page that I was also introduced to by my uncle in California who recommended this topic, was formed a few years ago, don't quite remember the date, and currently it has over 150,000 members and chapters in 25 states to address the issue of the Indian visa backlog case that's basically going on in this country. So as I mentioned before, over 100 Indian techies and professionals had implored Congress to address this issue on October 24th. So it actually happened 4 days ago. It didn't happen on the 18th. But so far, it's gone very little traction in Congress. No legislation has yet been addressed, has yet been introduced in either chamber to address this issue. And what this basically shows is a completely different side in the whole dreamer argument, because these people are also dreamers, sons and daughters of people who were born to green card visa holders who are now out of their secondary education phase here in this country. They're called the H4 dreamers, as we mentioned. They're not all people who came into this country to leech off the resources and welfare that the federal government provides. These are people who have been here legally, they're tax paying, but they're not getting the benefits they deserve as citizens of this country for over a decade, especially people who were born here, but were unfortunately sons and daughters of people who did not have American citizenship. So personally, from the background that I come from, I would definitely most people definitely want these people to get visas, but the vetting process has to definitely be changed, because it's become too stringent on people who deserve to be in this country, and it's become a little looser, especially after some acts, especially DAPA, which wasn't passed, which was the Deferred Action for Parental Arrivals Act, which basically gave the same benefits to parents as DACA did to children of illegal immigrants. The DAPA program didn't pass per se, but the DAPA program definitely did loosen a bunch of regulations on people who came to this country illegally, especially from the southern border. And what was basically happening was they, in they got citizenship with the DACA Act at least. They basically got to cut in line from the people who were in this country for over a decade on green cards and on F1s if you were a son or daughter of someone who was on a green card. And that's something that definitely needs to be addressed by the Trump administration rather than cracking down on H-1Bs as a whole, because statistically there's more people leaving this country than entering this country at this given point in time, and that's been a trend that's been that's been a trend that's been continuing for more than a year. The past more than a year or so. In fact, the birth rate has gone down drastically. I think it's at plus 0.5% at this point for this country. So it needs to be addressed. I don't think the overpopulation argument is as strong or is as pertinent as the Trump administration is making it out to be, although I definitely agree that you cannot allow everyone in this country. You definitely have to fix your vetting systems in terms of prioritization of who comes in and who goes to the back of the line, which is the people that come in illegally with the intent not to provide as many resources to this country, or unjustly, rather than people who've come here legally but then overstay their stay because the federal government or even the state governments are not able to provide them with the resources they need to become a full-fledged citizen of the United States and provide their services with more benefits that they deserve. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for tuning into this episode of A Short. I am Shan, and good night.